Broken heart opening emotional hook. Imagine standing at a party, surrounded by people laughing, and the man you sacrificed everything for calls you useless in front of them all. That's what happened to 29-year-old Selina Nwosu. But what nobody knew was that every light shining that night, every glass lifted, every bill settled, was all because of her. And when the truth came out, the laughter turned to silence. The hall in Abuja sparkled with golden lights, every corner filled with music, laughter, and the sound of clinking glasses. Chinedu Okeke, dressed in his finest suit, walked in with his chest out, greeting people with loud laughter, soaking in the admiration like a king among his subjects. His friends slapped his back, praising his success and his hard work. Everyone seemed convinced that he was the man of the hour, the one who made all of this happen. Beside him, Selina Nwosu walked quietly, her elegant dress shimmering under the lights. She smiled politely at the guests who greeted her, but her smile did not reach her eyes. While Chinedu thrived on the attention, Selina remained in the background, almost invisible to the crowd. No one noticed the weariness in her eyes, the heaviness in her steps. For months she had been the one holding the pieces together, paying bills, handling debts, and covering costs no one else even imagined. The band played louder and Chinedu raised his glass, basking in the glow of admiration. People cheered his name, believing his empire was built on his brilliance. Selina stood silently, her hands clasped in front of her, watching him with a mix of sadness and quiet strength. She knew the truth, every chandelier shining above them, every bottle of champagne flowing, every smile around the room was paid for by her sacrifices. Yet no one clapped for her. No one turned to her with gratitude. She was just the wife, standing in the shadow of a man who enjoyed the crown she had secretly placed on his head. The music roared, but inside her heart was silent. She carried the weight of the night, but to the crowd it was all Chinedu's glory. That evening, under the glittering lights, Selina realized how invisible her sacrifices had become. And though she stayed silent, her eyes carried a promise. The truth would not stay hidden forever. The music softened, and the spotlight shifted as Chinedu strutted toward the microphone. His face glistened with pride, and his friends cheered him on, already expecting another one of his loud jokes. He tapped the mic, his voice booming through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's be honest tonight." The crowd leaned in, eager to hear what their host would say. Then his smile turned sharp, his finger pointing directly at Selina. With a laugh that cut deeper than a knife, he said, "My wife doesn't know anything about success. She's just lucky I married her." The hall exploded with laughter. Glasses clinked as men slapped their thighs. Women covered their mouths in shock before joining in, and Chinedu's friends roared the loudest, egging him on. Selina froze. The words echoed in her chest like a thunderclap. For a moment, her breath caught, and her knees almost buckled under the weight of humiliation. Her face burned, her throat tightened, and yet she forced herself to stand tall. She clenched her fists by her side, nails digging into her palms, holding back the tears that threatened to fall. The laughter around her felt like arrows piercing her heart. Some women gave her pitying glances, while others smirked, as if enjoying the spectacle. Chinedu basked in the applause, bowing slightly, as though mocking her was part of his grand performance. To him, she was just a prop in his show, someone to belittle so he could shine brighter. Inside, Selina's heart screamed, "How dare you?" After everything she had done, after every silent sacrifice, he dared to drag her dignity across the floor like this? But she said nothing. Her silence was not weakness, it was the storm gathering strength. Behind her calm face, behind her lowered gaze, a fire burned. The crowd laughed on, unaware that in that very moment, the woman they mocked was no longer the quiet wife in the shadows. She was preparing to rewrite the story, and when she spoke, no laughter would remain. Selina forced a weak smile, pretending the words hadn't cut her soul in half, and gently slipped away from the spotlight. She moved slowly, her heels clicking against the marble floor, each step heavier than the last. The laughter still rang behind her like cruel music, echoing in her chest. She found a quiet corner, hidden beneath a tall decorative palm, and finally allowed her mask to slip. Her shoulders sagged, and her hands trembled as she held her clutch tightly against her chest as though it could keep her from breaking apart. Adana, her lifelong friend, followed closely. She placed a firm but gentle hand on Selina's arm and leaned close. "Don't let them crush you," she whispered, her voice strong, steady, like an anchor in the middle of a storm. Selina turned her face toward her, blinking back the tears that burned her eyes. Adana's gaze was full of fire, the kind of fire only a true friend carried when seeing someone they loved humiliated. But Selina could barely hear her over the pounding of her own heart. She looked out toward the hall, where the laughter was still rolling, where people whispered and smiled at her expense, where Chinedu stood tall enjoying his cruel joke. Her mind spun in circles, each memory of her sacrifices flashing before her like lightning. "They laugh because they don't know," she thought bitterly. "They don't know who has been paying for this party. They don't know who has been saving this man from ruin. They don't know the truth I have buried for years." That single tear slipped down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away. For too long she had chosen silence, believing dignity meant swallowing pain. For too long, she had let Chinedu take the spotlight while she worked in the shadows, invisible, unacknowledged. But tonight something inside her cracked wide open. Her chest rose and fell as she steadied herself, fire replacing the ache. "Enough is enough," her mind whispered, louder than the noise of the hall. "Tonight they will know. Tonight they will hear my voice." Selina's pain no longer felt like weakness. It had transformed into strength, into courage. And though her hands still trembled, her resolve grew steady. This was no longer about humiliation. It was about reclaiming her name, her worth, her place before the glow of the chandeliers and the applause of the crowd. There was another story, one no one in that glittering hall had ever heard. Selina was not always the silent wife standing behind a boastful husband. She was once a sharp-minded accountant, respected in her firm for her discipline and intelligence. Numbers were her language, and stability was her gift. But when she married Chinedu, she chose love over career, believing they would build something greater together. 2 years ago, when Chinedu's empire began to crumble, it was Selina who felt the ground shaking beneath them. His business, which looked strong from the outside, was drowning in debts. Creditors called day and night, threatening court cases. He was on the brink of losing everything: the office, the cars, the respect of society. The same friends who laughed with him tonight had begun to distance themselves back then, whispering that his days of glory were over. In those dark nights when Chinedu sat with his head in his hands, cursing his fate, Selina stayed awake with her calculator and her thoughts. Quietly, she dipped into her own savings, the money she had carefully set aside during her years of hard work. And when that was not enough, she touched the inheritance her late father had left her. It was meant for her future security, meant to protect her in times of need. But she didn't think twice. She gave it all to cover his debts, to keep the bank from taking their home, to silence the creditors who mocked his name. Selina became the invisible pillar that held up the walls of his crumbling empire. She paid for the rented venues that made him look successful again, the polished suits he wore to regain confidence, the parties that attracted investors back into his circle. Each sacrifice she made was a brick in the foundation of the image he now paraded before the world. And yet, standing in the present, she realized the bitter truth. Without her, Chinedu would have been nothing but a forgotten man, crushed under his own failures. Every light shining in that hall tonight was powered by her sacrifices. Every smile he wore, every glass he raised, every cheer he received, was built on her hidden story. And soon, everyone would note Selina's steps were slow as she moved through the crowded hall, still trying to steady her breathing. She wanted a moment alone, a chance to gather herself, but then her ears caught something that cut deeper than the laughter had. Just a few feet away, Chinedu stood with a group of his closest friends, their glasses raised, their voices careless and loud. He leaned in, his tone dripping with pride as if he were giving them a secret to laugh about. "She's just my wife," Chinedu sneered. "I run everything. She's only here for the food." The men around him chuckled, shaking their heads as though Selina was nothing but a decoration, an afterthought in her own marriage. Those words pierced her like a knife. Humiliation had stung her earlier, but this was different. This was betrayal. After everything she had given, everything she had sacrificed in silence, to hear him speak of her as if she were worthless, it was almost unbearable. Her chest tightened, and for a moment, she felt as though the room was closing in on her. The music and laughter faded to a distant hum, drowned out by the pounding of her heart. She wanted to scream, to walk up to him and throw the truth in his face right then. But instead she stood still, her fists clenched at her sides, her eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall. This wasn't just about wounded pride anymore. It was about a woman realizing the man she had lifted from the ashes had buried her beneath them. Selina's mind replayed the countless nights she stayed awake calculating how to save his business, the bills she paid with trembling hands, the inheritance she surrendered without hesitation. Every sacrifice had been an act of love, but in his mouth, her love had turned into nothing more than a punchline for his friends. The betrayal burned so fiercely it dried her tears and replaced her sorrow with fire. She knew then that staying silent would only give him more power. If she allowed his lies to go unchallenged, she would lose herself completely. Her heart steadied, and a decision crystallized inside her like glass. The laughter of his friends no longer mattered. Chinedu's arrogance no longer mattered. Tonight, in this very hall, the truth would no longer hide in the shadows. Tonight, everyone would know who truly carried the weight of his so-called success. Selina's legs felt heavy as she moved through the crowd, but her spirit burned stronger with each step. Every laugh, every whisper, every mocking glance she had endured that night pushed her forward. She could feel the weight of years of silence pressing against her chest, but she refused to bow to it anymore. The stage, the very place Chinedu had used to humiliate her, would now become the place where her truth was born. As she reached the DJ's booth, her fingers brushed against the microphone. Her hands trembled, not from fear of speaking, but from the storm that had been waiting too long to break free. Chinedu turned to her with that smug smile, his friends grinning as if they were about to watch him bask in even more glory. He leaned casually against the podium, fully convinced she was there to celebrate him, to polish the crown he thought he wore. But Selina's eyes no longer held the timid softness of a woman willing to hide. Her gaze was steady, her back straight, and though her voice shook at first, it quickly grew into something fierce, something that could not be ignored. "This party," she said, her tone cutting through the music and chatter like a blade. "These bills, this so-called empire, who do you think is paying for all of it?" The words hung in the air like thunder before the strike of lightning. A thick silence fell over the hall. The glasses that clinked moments before froze midair. The laughter died instantly, and even the music seemed to quiet as though the walls themselves needed to hear her. Heads turned, eyes widened, and whispers began to ripple, softer this time, full of confusion and disbelief. Chinedu's smirk faltered just for a second. He tried to recover it, shifting his stance, forcing a laugh, but the crack in his confidence was clear to everyone watching. Selina tightened her grip on the microphone, her courage swelling with the stunned stares fixed on her. For the first time that evening, the hall wasn't his stage, it was hers. She had taken it back with one question, and that question pierced deeper than any insult he had thrown at her. And in that silence, in that moment when the crowd leaned closer, hungry for the truth, Selina knew there was no turning back. Tonight, her voice would be louder than his arrogance, and the world would finally see her. The silence that followed Selina's bold words was so heavy that it felt like the air itself had frozen. Every pair of eyes in the glittering hall turned toward her, waiting, doubting, and questioning if she truly meant what she said. Chinedu let out a nervous laugh, waving dismissively as if her statement was just a wife's dramatic outburst. "Ignore her," he muttered, but his voice cracked slightly, betraying his unease. Selina, however, did not waver. With calm hands, she reached into her clutch and pulled out a neatly folded envelope. From it, she drew out a stack of papers, receipts, bank transfers, contracts, all stamped, signed, and dated. The hall gasped as she held them high, her voice strong and unshaken. "Here is the truth," she declared. "Every bill paid, every loan cleared, every celebration financed, it was me. This venue, this food, these lights, all of it is under my name." The sound of her words echoed against the grand walls. Guests leaned forward, straining to see the papers as she handed them to one of the elders present. Murmurs began to swirl, disbelief turning into shock, and shock hardening into outrage. Not at Selina, but at the man who had mocked her while feeding on her sacrifices. Adana, unable to stay silent any longer, stepped boldly from the crowd. Her voice carried with the weight of truth. She's been the one keeping this family afloat. Without her, none of you would even be here tonight. Gasps spread like wildfire. Women placed hands over their mouths. Men shook their heads in disbelief. A few guests whispered, "Could it be true? She funded everything." Others turned their accusing eyes toward Chinedu, who suddenly looked smaller than ever before. Chinedu's face drained of color as he stepped back. The confidence he once wore like a crown now shattered. His friends, who had laughed along with his cruel jokes earlier, slowly put down their glasses, ashamed to even be seen beside him. The power in the room shifted entirely, the tide of respect and admiration flowing away from him and settling on Selina. Standing tall, Selina no longer looked like the quiet, overshadowed wife. In that moment, she was the storm breaking through the silence, the light exposing every hidden lie. The party had begun as his triumph, but now it belonged entirely to her. Chinedu stood frozen, his mouth opening but no words coming out. The proud smirk that had danced on his lips all evening was gone, replaced by a look of panic that spread across his face like fire. The papers Selina revealed felt like chains dragging him down in front of everyone. He wanted to speak, to defend himself, but the weight of truth silenced him. His skin turned pale, his eyes darting desperately around the hall, searching for support that no longer existed. The same friends who had clapped him on the back and laughed at his cruel jokes just moments ago began stepping away. One by one, they distanced themselves, ashamed to be associated with him. Glasses were set down on tables, whispers floated through the room, and the tide of the crowd shifted completely. The very men who had once joined him in mocking Selina now avoided his gaze, their faces heavy with guilt. From the corner, a voice whispered, just loud enough for the silence to carry it across the hall. He mocked her, but she saved him. Another voice followed. All this time it was her. The murmurs grew, weaving through the guests until they became a chorus of judgment. The humiliation pressed harder against Chinedu's chest than any fist ever could. His shoulders slumped. The man who had strutted into the party like a king now stood like a beggar stripped of his crown. Pride, the very thing he had worn so arrogantly, melted into shame before everyone's eyes. He could not look at Selina, not after all the ways he had belittled her, not after the truth showed the world that she was the one holding everything together while he pretended to be the provider. Every step he had taken earlier in confidence now felt like a mistake replaying in his mind. He could still hear his own mocking words, but now they sounded hollow, foolish, and cruel. The hall that once celebrated him now turned into a courtroom, each guest silently delivering their verdict through stares of disappointment. Chinedu lowered his head, shrinking under the weight of his own downfall. The pride that had carried him for so long had finally betrayed him, leaving him stripped, exposed, and humiliated in front of the very people he had tried so hard to impress. Selina stood tall, her hand still gripping the microphone, but her voice no longer trembled. The weight she had carried in silence for years finally rolled off her shoulders. She looked across the room, her eyes steady, her tone clear. "From today," she declared, her words slicing through the thick silence, "I will no longer hide behind a man who disrespects me. I will stand on my own." For a moment, the hall remained frozen, as if the world itself held its breath. Then, like a wave breaking against the shore, the applause began. It started with a few claps, hesitant yet full of admiration, and quickly spread until the entire room erupted. The sound thundered through the hall, drowning out every trace of Chinedu's earlier arrogance. Selina's voice had awakened something powerful in everyone present. Among the crowd, women wiped their eyes, some openly weeping as they clapped and cheered. They weren't just celebrating Selina, they were celebrating themselves. Every moment they had been silenced, every time they had been told they were less. Selina's boldness spoke to their hearts, giving voice to battles they too had fought quietly in their homes, their workplaces, their marriages. She had said the words many had longed to scream. Men shifted uncomfortably, some ashamed of how they had laughed earlier, others nodding slowly as if finally realizing the truth. The balance of the room had changed. Where Chinedu once stood as the center of attention, it was now Selina who commanded the spotlight. And she didn't even need to boast. Her truth was stronger than any lie. Chinedu remained rooted in place, his face tight with humiliation, watching helplessly as the crowd embraced the woman he had mocked. Each clap, each cheer felt like a blow to his pride. He had wanted the night to prove his power, but instead it proved hers. Selina didn't smile, she didn't gloat. Her calmness was fiercer than any anger could have been. She simply stood there, tall and unshaken, the applause washing over her like a crown she had finally earned. For the first time in years, she wasn't in the shadow of anyone. She was the light, and everyone could see it. The power had shifted completely, and there was no going back. The music inside the hall still throbbed faintly, but Selina no longer heard it. She walked out through the golden doors of the party venue, her heels clicking against the marble floor, each step filled with a new kind of strength. Her head was held high, her face calm, almost serene. Behind her, the chaos of whispers and shocked voices filled the air, but she didn't look back. The night had already given her everything she needed: her voice, her dignity, her freedom. Chinedu stumbled after her. His once proud shoulders slumped like a man who had been stripped of his crown. His voice cracked as he begged, "Selina, wait. Please, you can't leave me like this. We can fix this. Don't do this to me." But the desperation in his tone only deepened the silence that stretched between them. For years he had mocked, belittled, and dismissed her. Tonight the tables had turned, and Selina was no longer the woman who endured in silence. As she stepped into the cool Abuja night, flashes of cameras blinded the path ahead. Reporters had gathered quickly, sensing a story far bigger than the party they had been invited to cover. Microphones were thrust toward her, questions hurled in the air. "Mrs. Okeke, is it true you financed everything? Will you continue with your husband's business? How do you feel after such humiliation?" Selina paused, her calm smile radiating more power than any outburst ever could. She let the lights settle on her face before answering, her voice steady, her words carrying across the night. "He tried to break me with humiliation," she said softly yet firmly. "But he forgot, truth has a way of shining brighter than any party lights." Gasps and murmurs filled the crowd as the cameras clicked faster, capturing every inch of her poise. Behind her, Chinedu lingered, his pleas drowned out by the storm of admiration swelling around Selina. In that moment it was clear who the world now saw as the true strength in the story. Selina's car pulled up, sleek and waiting. She slid inside gracefully, the door closing with finality. As the vehicle drove off, leaving Chinedu standing helpless under the glare of cameras, the night air seemed to hum with a new beginning. Selina wasn't just leaving a party, she was stepping into a new dawn, one where her light could never again be dimmed.